I evicted my rude roommates in under a day. Their crazy parties and theft pushed me to learn about their lease violations. I am unsure whether this is considered professional. However, it is certainly beyond the trivial. I also apologize for any formatting issues, as I am using my mobile device, and this is my first experience posting a longer narrative. Additionally, I apologize for the lengthy post, as the background information is quite significant. Summary at the end. During my first year of college, I underwent an extensive process with my institution to obtain approval to reside off campus as a freshman, which is not typically permitted, but they made an exception in my case. I moved in through a lease takeover arrangement as a female in an apartment designated for males. The apartment had 4 bedrooms, each leased individually, but 2 rooms shared 1 bathroom, while all residents shared a kitchen, living room, and laundry area. When I moved in, the place was in a deplorable condition, but I managed to clean it up to make it livable. Having grown up with brothers, I had no issues being around guys as long as they demonstrated a reasonable level of respect. Additionally, I had the kitchen all to myself. As an engineering student, I asked the roommates to inform me in advance if they planned to have friends over or to keep the volume of the music at a lower level. To my surprise, this particular apartment was infamous for being a party house, and I soon learned the reason behind that reputation. I was working shifts of 8 to 12 hours at a retail job while attending school full-time. After returning home at 11 p.m. completely exhausted, I was met with booming music and a crowd of people spilling out the front door. I was furious. Fortunately, each room was secured with a deadbolt, and I remembered to lock mine before heading out to work. There were easily around 50 people present. As a 20-year-old who just wanted to rest, I made the only reasonable decision I packed an overnight bag, secured my room, and called a friend for help before sleeping at their place. Later on, I discovered that one of my roommates was engaging in illegal activities. Only 3 individuals were of legal drinking age, and 1 girl was just 14 years old. The girlfriend of one of my roommates was still in high school and invited all her friends, who then brought even more guests. The police eventually shut down the party but, fortunately, did not check IDs, so no arrests were made. At this point, I believed I could still manage the situation. Then things worsened as they began to use my belongings in the kitchen, take my food, and the final straw was when they damaged my newly acquired kitchen knives. These were brand new knives that now had nick-shaped dents, as if someone had engaged in swordplay with them. It is worth mentioning that I communicated all my concerns that were beyond minor inconveniences, like them using my laundry detergent, and requested that my boundaries be acknowledged. Their guests would vomit and soil the toilet. They would attempt to enter my room to use my bed while I was asleep. One girlfriend even barged into my room and stared at me. I woke up when I forgot to lock my door to inform me that 4 people were arriving. My food and belongings were continually being taken and damaged, and I had grown weary of the situation. I attempted to befriend my various roommates in a bid to encourage them to be more considerate, but the information I received was even more shocking. Remember how I was involved in a lease takeover? Our apartment not only had paperwork requirements, but it also included an associated fee for the lease takeover. I discovered that my roommates were friends of the individuals listed on the lease. Their friends had moved to another apartment complex and did not want to pay the takeover fee. My roommates had neither paid the fee nor signed any documents to place themselves on the lease. Consequently, the original leaseholder was not residing there. I decided to save this information for later. A few weeks passed, and while the parties became smaller, they still occurred. One day, I was discussing painting my room due to the stains left by previous tenants. Our apartment had a policy allowing residents to paint their rooms if they either 1, obtained prior approval, or 2, painted over it before moving out. The maintenance staff was very nice and allowed me to choose a custom color for my room, a lovely light sky blue, which they provided and assisted me in applying. When my roommates learned that I painted, they inquired about it, unaware of the chaos that would follow. Instead of painting their rooms, they chose to spray paint them. They did not use any offensive or gang-related symbols, but they spray painted nonetheless. The parties continued, but now they allowed their guests to write on the walls with various Sharpie markers. This was the moment I realized that I needed to take action. I ended up capturing photographs of the room on Snapchat and saved them to my camera roll. I was aware that my apartment complex would likely do nothing about the parties and might even hold me accountable for the underage individuals in attendance. Additionally, the items I stored in the shared areas could legally be considered communal property. My initial step was to approach the building manager regarding the parties. As I had suspected, there was little I could do aside from calling the police. I could complain all I wanted about the state of the apartment caused by my roommates, along with the theft and damage to my possessions, but they would not take action. They did not seem bothered when I mentioned that 2 out of the 4 residents living there were not on the lease. The other person on my side was easygoing and posed no issue. As long as rent was paid consistently, it seemed they were disinterested in the situation. After going through this, I pulled out my camera roll and asked the manager to scroll through, as I had about 15 pictures of just one room. She became angry and started rambling about gang graffiti, insisting that she would not tolerate it. I knew that there were no gang symbols whatsoever on the walls. It was simply the work of foolish youths, but it certainly did not present well. I refrained from correcting her and reminded her that the rooms in question were occupied by individuals who were not even legal tenants. I secured as many of my belongings from the kitchen as I could recall before heading to work and did not witness the aftermath, as 2 office employees proceeded to evict the others within hours. They were not the legal tenants and had clearly exceeded the guest limit of 7 days. They were instructed to gather their belongings, and by the time I returned home from my shift 10 hours later, they had vacated. I received numerous hateful and threatening messages from one of the roommate's girlfriends. I do not recall the exact content since this occurred several years ago in 2016, and I did not retain any messages beyond a year. I did save the correspondence once she began issuing threats involving stalking and physical harm. I maintained a polite and neutral tone in my replies in case I needed to present them in court. They did manage to achieve a small measure of revenge as I remembered to secure my pots, but in my rush, I neglected to grab the lids. They stole the lids to all of my cookware, including my crockpot. They also took any food they could find and placed it in the now lidless crockpot along with all of my spices before leaving it on. I have no idea what liquid was used, and I do not want to know. Ultimately, I ended up paying the rent of a 1-bedroom apartment while residing in a 4-bedroom unit when the previous roommate's lease concluded a few months later. The rooms were leased individually. Furthermore, the friends of the now former roommates who were listed on the lease had to come in to clean and paint the walls white. You know what happens when you apply water-based white paint over red and black permanent markers. They eventually hired someone to make it look acceptable. I heard that in some areas it required 9 or more layers of paint, and in others, it was entirely spackled, which is not the correct term, but it was a specialized paint that prevented the ink from bleeding through and had a very thick texture. I felt a twinge of sympathy for the original leaseholders, as they were now burdened with the damages, required to repaint, and still had to pay rent on this apartment. I had met them previously and maintained a cordial relationship with them. I even assisted one individual with painting and reassured him that I held no ill feelings toward him. I expressed my regret over how things had unfolded, and while he was unhappy with me, he did not blame me either. I rationalized that they were aware they were violating the terms of their lease and knew exactly who their friends were when they failed to transfer the lease. If they had not repainted the room as they did, the complex management likely would not have taken any action. Summary: my roommates did not respect me or my possessions, so I took the time to befriend them and used the knowledge I gained to have them evicted. They had to move out within just a few hours. Edit 1. I received several comments suggesting that the title was my summary. First of all, if you do not want to read it, do not click on it. Secondly, I hope this revision is more satisfactory. Edit 2. Someone made a valid point that the bathroom is the most obvious location to dispose of human waste. My point, which I failed to clearly express, was that there was no flushing involved, and several instances occurred where the toilet contained a significant amount of waste and or vomit from multiple people when I returned home. Sometimes plunging would be effective, but other times, the clog had to be manually removed. As it was my half of the apartment, I had to tackle the clog before I could attend to my own needs. This was not the best sight to encounter first thing in the morning.